Hello, everyone. I am Tim Dugan from Crown, and I wanted to introduce you to Camille Bordas and her brilliant novel, How to Behave in a Crowd, which comes out in August. Camille grew up in France and Mexico and now lives in Chicago. She is a first novelist with an asterisk, which is that she wrote 2 novels previously in French for the esteemed French publisher Gallimard, which is sort of the FSG of France, and this is her first novel written in English and published in America. How to Behave in a Crowd is unlike anything that I have ever read, and once I started reading it, I knew I had to publish it. It's told from the point of view of an 11-year-old boy named Isidore, who lives in a French village and is the youngest of 6 siblings in a big, eccentric family. He keeps running away from home, and he's not entirely sure why. It might have to do with the fact that nearly all of his siblings are precocious and borderline autistic geniuses, several of whom got their PhDs while they were still teenagers. But Isidore notices things that the others don't, and he asks questions that they are afraid to ask. So when tragedy strikes the family, he's the one who recognizes how everyone is struggling with their own grief, and he realizes he might be the only one who can help them. It is an incredibly powerful portrait of the awkwardness and pain and sheer joy of growing up. I kept turning the pages without ever quite knowing where it was going, just since it was so beautifully written and full of warmth and empathy. The first person we heard from after sending out the manuscript was George Saunders, who called it, quote, an utterly charming book, moving, witty, funny, and especially wonderful for the mature kind-heartedness of its view of humanity. And he was the first of many to chime in. It is an amazingly accomplished novel by a writer who has an extraordinarily bright future. She just had her first story in The New Yorker. Everyone at Crown who loved this read it and loved it immediately, as I did. She can speak about it much better than I can, so here is Camille Bordas.
Well, thank you, Tim. I wish I were so sure that I can speak about it better than you, but I'm a little nervous. It's the first time I see so many librarians at once, and so many writers, actually. I don't know that many writers, so it's like I'm a little intimidated by the level of intelligence in the room, so there might not be much eye contact between us, because also what doesn't help is that I'm not really sure how to talk about my book. The truth is that when I write, I always think of the image that Doctorow had to describe what it was like to write a novel, and you probably know the image I'm talking about, but he compared writing a novel to driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. And maybe you're all sick of hearing that one Doctorow quote, but of all the feel-good quotes that exist out there about writing, that's the one that really speaks to me, and I find it very true, and also I find comfort in it. And it's a quote I can hide behind when people ask me what my books are about when I'm in the middle of writing them. So it's a very convenient one. The problem, though, is that when I actually finish a book, there's never a big reveal moment where I'm shown a whole map of the road I just traveled with all the turns I've taken. And more importantly, there's no showing of all the other roads I could have taken, so I'm never quite sure I took the right road. So I've made it in the fog and in the night, and that's great, but when I turn around to look behind me, there's just more night and more fog, so, you know, it creates some panic. I'm like, what did I just spend 2 years working on? What does it all mean? And so I just read and reread and reread it, and little by little, as I read, what I wrote, it starts making a little more sense. But still, when it comes time to talk about it, there's always a fear that I might say the wrong things. And maybe it's because I don't want to put any ideas into the heads of people who haven't read it yet. But I'm always a little reluctant to say, well, there's what I try to do here. And I don't know, because then I will have created expectations, and, you know, when you set a bar, no matter how low, then there's potential for disappointment, and I never know what choices to make. I mean, it's complicated. But I know I have to say something today because, you know, you all came. And and also I know that my book won't find readers by sitting alone in a corner, all mysterious, so I will need your help. And in order for you to help it, you need to like it, and in order to like it, you need to have read it. And in order to read it, maybe you need me to give you a reason. So I'll try. Uh, First of all, I really like the cover. I think I really like it. I know it's not reason enough to read a book, but I like it because it catches your attention while saying absolutely nothing about the book, which is something you might have noticed I've been trying to do so far. But okay. I wish I had anecdotes or a cool story to share about how I got the idea for the book, but I don't. I don't really write from big ideas or high concepts or anything like that. Plot always comes, it always comes out of writing down observations and characters out of the voices I find to make those observations. So it's a little, I mean, it's not a very plotty novel, obviously. It's more of a portrait of this child and his family. And so while I can't exactly tell you what it is I tried to say here, I know what I set out to do. And I set out to write a book that could be loved with characters that could be remembered, because that's my only goal when I start a novel, is to write a good book, a book that I could love and that other people maybe, could love as well. About the book itself, so Tim said a couple things already. It's a book about a family, a big family of book-smart and life-dumb children. The narrator of the book, so Isidore, he's the youngest of these 6 children, and he's not as smart as his brothers and sisters, and therefore he assumes that he has to learn a bit about actual life to balance things out. And so over the course of the book, life will send its own trials his way, but he will also seek out adventures on his own. As Tim said, he tries to run away a few times, just for the experience, it seems, but he never gets really far because he always realizes he forgot something, material or otherwise. And this is not at all discouraging to him, because at least he's learning from each of his failed attempts, and he's glad for that. He's a pretty positive person. Also, he's not remotely unintelligent. He's just not quite as smart as his siblings, but they're very smart, so that's not a big problem. He's very analytical and curious, and he really wants to understand things and people around him. And even though he barely understands his siblings at the beginning of the novel, he really loves them, and that's, of course, really important, since this initial situation of love, even though their family is very weird and complicated, is what sets the scene for him as a character to be disappointed in the people he looks up to, and so yeah. So the first part of the book focuses on his home life, mainly his different relationships with his many siblings and his parents, and then one of the characters dies suddenly, and that's the end of part 1. In the second part, Isidore attends a couple of his sister's PhD defenses, and he's also put to work by his 3rd sister on her biography. She's 13 years old, and she thinks that she'll end up very famous, and she wants Isidore to document her formative years, so he gets to work on that, and he does this very happily. He's a very positive person, as I said, and he thinks that maybe if he does all this, if he understands his sisters better, the whole family will end up closer or something. So he tries. In the third part, I won't tell you what happens in the third part, and by the fourth part, some cracks have been made into his armor of niceness, and he becomes more of his own man. I mean, he's 13 at the end of the book, but all the while he builds weird friendships with a suicidal girl at school, and he becomes friends also with his village's oldest citizen, Daphne, who, as the book progresses, not only becomes the oldest citizen of France, but of Europe and the world. So she's the local celebrity, and they get along fine. So that's the story in a nutshell. It's not an academic book, obviously, even though it's about academics. Hopefully it is intellectually engaging and entertaining, and people say it's funny. I don't laugh at it anymore. I read it too much, but I wanted it primarily to be a warm book, an intimate thing that the reader would really want to be in more than, And yeah, I want people to feel good in it. The other thing I can say for sure about it, and as Tim said, is that I wrote it in English. I don't know if you can hear my accent, because when I'm nervous it comes out. But so before moving here to the States, that was 5 years ago, I never thought I would write in a language other than French. But it became pretty clear a few months into my American life that I would give it a try. And so I learned English as a teenager, watching a lot of movies. But before that, as a child, I learned Spanish because it was the language that my mother's side of the family spoke. So I learned it as a child. And the weird thing with bilingualism is that, yes, as everyone says, it's very, it's great. It gives you two different perspectives on the world, et cetera, et cetera. And I really like it. I mean, I love speaking two languages as a child, but what I found also is that it could be very frustrating at times because there are no equivalents for everything. It's not I'm a very methodical person, but there's not a translation for everything. It's not math. So both Spanish and French had untranslatable words, of course, and yeah, maybe some languages, it felt like maybe some languages were just better at saying certain things, and it seemed a little crazy to me. Sometimes I would really like a Spanish phrase, but when I would try to translate it into French, it would fall flat. It fell flat, and because of all of that, I realized very early on, even before I started writing fiction, how much could get lost in translation. And so when I did start to write in French at the time, it was always somewhere in the back of my head that I should try to write sentences that at least felt to me like they wouldn't lose too much in translation. So, and now that I write in English, I try to hold on to this aesthetic even more. And it doesn't mean that I only write short declarative sentences, but just that I try to be very precise, to use as few ready-made expressions as possible, or even to avoid cultural references because, I mean, I can make cultural references from time to time, but they have to be big, well-shared things like Plato or Star Wars, and they have to be at least things that people have heard of. So yeah, and this type of writing does come with sacrifices a little bit. You have to let some things go. You have to kill a joke from time to time, or let go of a reference that won't translate. But in the end, I really like making those kinds of sacrifices because it helps me see the core of my scene better. And yeah, and I guess it is also because I had experience writing this way in French, that is writing books in French, but that had nothing really particularly French about them, that the idea of writing in English wasn't, to me, as intimidating as other people might imagine. So yeah, I'm asked from time to time if it's harder to write in English or French, and in the end, I have to say that it isn't much harder to write in English. It just feels if we can like invoke the doctoral quote back again, is that it just feels like the headlights maybe are a little dimmer, and that makes it so you have to be more focused on the road, even more focused. But more focused, I think, is something a writer should always aspire to, and in a way, writing in English has forced me to do that, to really pay attention to every little detail. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and I'm really happy that Tim liked it. I hope you'll like it too. Thank you for your attention.